Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Holy Shed, and happy Easter, by the way. As you probably know, Easter goes on for ages in the church calendar, so happy Easter probably still applies whenever you're listening to this. Not quite Christmas, but you know what I mean. So anyway, we have spent all of Lent and a little bit more thinking about themes from my book, The Post-Evangelical, which was published in 1995, 30 years ago. Today is going to be our last session in this series, but hopefully not the least. And it opens up some important themes that I'm sure we will come back to in the coming months. Speaking of which, I'll be taking a break next week. So don't get in a panic if you can't find me. It's me, not you. And I will be back to start afresh on the 4th of May. And if you have themes that you'd like me to address, questions you'd like to ask or whatever in the coming weeks, please be in touch and let me know, because I do really value your ideas and questions. Sitting here in my shed or on my own sometimes can be a bit befuddling. So ideas and thoughts from you always go down well. So email me or message me or post on Facebook or whatever. Now, you know, from almost the moment that the Post-Evangelical appeared, I knew that it would need a part two. It took me 13 years to get there, but I finally managed it in 2008 with my book, Reimagining Christianity, which was really my statement of, but this I can believe. I wanted to call that book Second Innocence, but the publisher dissuaded me, which I've always regretted. That said, I guess the Post-Evangelical did represent a moment of disenchantment in a good sense, a point of deconstruction of old certainties. And the follow-up book does what it says on the tin. It is about re-enchantment. And for me, chapter 3 is the key chapter in that book. I call that chapter Progressive Orthodoxy. You have to change to stay the same. Now, orthodoxy, of course, is a problematic term for many of us, but I used it in that context deliberately as a symbol, really, a symbol of the importance of not throwing everything away, but connecting with the past. The past still was part of who we are as a faith community. The progressive bit represents a connection with the present, that's saying, we have to change to stay the same. So progressive orthodoxy is a juxtaposition of what could sound like an oxymoron. But I think it's holding these two things in tension, because I think that's what it is. It's, our role in the present is to mediate, to bring together these two things. Some people think that faithfulness to the original message of Christianity means keeping it exactly the same. So all the emphasis is on the kind of orthodox pole of that tension. As I said a couple of sheds ago, this kind of reminds me, it takes me to that parable of the talents, where the servant in the parable buried his one talent in the ground in the hope of preserving it, of keeping it safe. It was an act of fear and anxiety, which didn't really work out. The servants who were praised were those who went out with their talents into the marketplace and traded with them. My little sort of theory, my hermeneutical imagination is that they would have been praised by the Lord even if it hadn't worked out, even if they'd lost the talents, but taken the risk. That's not in the story, I know, but I like to think of it that way. Sort of better to have loved and lost than never loved at all, kind of thing, What I take from this is that we cannot preserve truth by deep freezing it. Truth is always something to take out into the marketplace of life. It is preserved, it is kept alive and vibrant in the interaction with its context, with the surrounding world. Just, keeping it all shut away in a book like all of these books behind me, burying in the ground, trying to keep it exactly sort of the same as it always was, I think is a way of wasting it, of losing it. So I'm not intending to dig too much into re-enchanting today, but simply to say that all of my ministry in writing and speech of whatever sort, it's all really, in my mind, an exercise in trading with the talent of Christian truth as I have received it, in order that its currency can remain buoyant and alive in a changing world and over the process of time. I love the story which I recount at the end of the 3rd chapter of Re-enchanting. It's like a little parable, really, but it's a quote from Kenneth Burke, the literary theorist and philosopher, who likened the drama of history to a great unending conversation. He said that's how we should think of history, as this great, huge, interactive conversation. And he writes this, I'm just going to read from it for you. He says, where does the drama of history get its material? From the unending conversation that is going on at the point in history when we were born. Imagine, he says, that you enter a parlour. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you, and they are engaged in a heated discussion, a discussion too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it's about. In fact, the discussion had already begun long before any of them were there, so that no one present is actually qualified to retrace for you all the steps that have gone before. You listen for a while, and then you put your oar in. Someone answers, you answer them, another comes to your defence, another lines up against you to either the embarrassment or the gratification of your opponent, depending upon the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. The hour grows late, and you must depart. And you do depart, with the discussion still vigorously in progress. Oh my, I love that. I love that so much. And he's talking about history, but I think equally you could be talking about tradition, that this is what tradition is. For me, tradition and theology thrive in a living conversation in the present, not in an historical monologue, which is how so much theology comes to us, as this kind of monologue from the past. But I think that theology and faith and tradition are alive and vibrant when they are in engagement, when they're in conversation. Burke's little parable reminds me that it's now our turn, right? We are the current conversation partners. The responsibility is on us to get stuck in, not sit by while other people argue it out, but to put our oar in, to get involved. Because, guys, we're at the vanguard of the whole evolution of Christian tradition. And we won't be here forever. We'll have to leave the parlour at some point. But right now we're here, and we have the opportunity to add to the great resource of this ongoing story or conversation. And that to me is just so exciting. Now, the important thing about history is not simply to repeat it, right? Or to replay it ad nauseum. The important thing about history is to add to it, and to know that we're adding to it, and to think about what we want to add to it. A process of mingling the stuff of the past with the stuff of today to create a new story, a new reality. I see responsible faith and theology as a form of alchemy, transforming the material of the past into existential treasures in the present. So many times, I have listened to sermons, read religious material that basically amounts to blah, 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 blah. It's rehashed same old, says nothing of any consequence or relevance into the present, adds nothing to my life or to the world, offers nothing fresh and vibrant, nothing life-giving, basically devoid of alchemy. And I think really that's what the act of preaching is really all about. I think preaching and all kinds of communication is a form of alchemy. It's a hermeneutical act, to use a different term. It's one of bringing together the treasures of this tradition in the past into an interaction with the world of the present. And what we need, what every generation needs really, is not pre-packed truth handed down like a parcel from, one generation to the next to keep it exactly as it was. No. What each generation needs is a tradition that's packed with shared speech, right? Shared symbols, a living community of revelation and dialogue, a tradition that evokes a process of critical questioning rather than just an act of conformity. I think, we need a tradition of reforming of truth for a new situation. It's not about starting all over again, reinventing Christianity from scratch. Of course not. We have to honour the past. The past is important and needs to be included as a conversation partner. It's part of the landscape, part of the conversation. But the important thing is not to get stuck in it. That's traditionalism. Tradition is alive and vibrant and evolving and moving forward. Traditionalism is static and fixed and unmovable. By itself, orthodoxy is a way of saying, this is it. Final destination, full stop, believe it or be damned, which I think really amounts to a form of idolatry, and I think that is how it is very often. The people become so attached to, so fixated on their particular set of doctrines, ideas, their creedal statements or whatever, and say this is the truth and nothing else is. This is idolatry basically, because the Christian faith isn't about propositional statements and doctrines. It's about God, and it's about a relationship with God. It's about an experience of God in the big picture of life. And so this alchemy approach to Christian faith is the process that I've attempted to contribute to with things like the post-evangelical, and which I've continued to pursue in successive writings and speaking projects and so on and so forth. I'm not interested in repetition. I don't want to be a repeater. I'm not interested in repetition. I'm interested in rebirth and reconfiguration of truth. New life for a new situation. And all of this comes, I think, within the scope of what's called process theology. We talked about it, didn't we, in the shed before Christmas. It's all really the same thing. Process theology works from the assumption that everything, all of reality, is basically in a state of flux, of process, of constant movement, change and evolution. Nothing remains the same. Cosmologically, this is what the universe is understood as. The universe is a process, not a thing, right? And so the whole reality in which we exist of the universe is of something which is changing and evolving all the time. I mean, we look up into the heavens and you can't really see that happening, but it's happening all the time. The universe is an expanding, process. The church, on the other hand, often gives the impression that nothing of consequence changes. You can fiddle around with the edges, but nothing of consequence changes. And in fact, the church is almost a byword for reactionary conservatism, a pillar of the establishment, a symbol of convention. And so much about it gives that impression that this is something which doesn't change or changes very, very slowly. Of course, that's not entirely true. Changes do occur, but usually they are very, very slow. And we find ourselves at the tail end of things rather than being at the forefront. And therein lies much of the dilemma of the church, that in a world where everything is in a state of flux, we do find ourselves stuck in the past and at the tail end of change. So reacting to the change that's going on rather than being at the forefront, helping to shape things. I mean, eventually we see the light, which is good, but often it's when the rest of society has kind of moved on. And of course, there are those people in the church who think, well, this is a great thing, this is what the church should be like. I completely disagree. As I say, I'm not advocating ditching the past. It's got still much to offer, but I think the past needs to be transfigured in the new realities of the present and the fast approaching future. And it's in that kind of meeting point, that crossroads, that interaction of past and present and future, that we exist, that faith exists, and it needs to be a kind of a vigorous conversation between all of these factors. And this doesn't just relate, by the way, to style, as far as the church is concerned, and change, but to substance too. So it's good, for example, for churches to take advantages of developing technologies, and you see that in some churches. But if the same old certainties are then rehashed and repackaged with the aid of digital technology, well, we've missed the point. That's not what matters. Or if we abandon, all the things like historic vestments in the church, imagining that priests in jeans and t-shirts will do the trick, or singing happy clappy choruses with soft rock worship bands instead of hymns. That's going to do it. If we go through those kind of changes, I'm not condemning them, but if we go through them without rethinking the very basis of our theology, well, we just won't be going anywhere at all. We've just re-wallpapered the room, if you like. The post-evangelical, in its own, broken and limited way, was my attempt to point out that people who were moving away from evangelical churches, from the church in general, is not because the church needs a makeover, which it does, not because the message isn't slick enough or cool enough, which it isn't, but more importantly, because the message no longer resonates, no longer answers to the core questions, concerns, the deep longings of a postmodern, now metamodern world. There have been major shifts in the church over the centuries, of course, notably in the Reformation, which signalled very important theological reinterpretations of the gospel message for that time. Prompted, didn't just happen, in a vacuum. Martin Luther didn't just wake up one day and think, go and nail this to the door of the church. It was all coming out of a changing landscape in the church and around the church, so prompted by things like the corruption of the Roman Catholic Church at that time, the rise of European nation states eagerly welcoming a break from the Holy Roman Empire, the rise of an educated elite, the invention of the printing press, and so on. All of these basically technological, political, and social factors required and prompted a change in the very nature of the Christian message. But today, a new reformation is needed. And I think that it's a shame, really, that, the Reformed churches sometimes are the very epitome of non-change, of reformation. And yet it needs to be a process that's going on and on and on. So, I mean, look, in a climate like this, a world in which there's a climate emergency and an environmental crisis, in which nation states are now actually waning, and there's the rise of populist politics, the horrendous contrasts between rich and poor nations, and an impending sense of capitalism going to crash. It's not working anymore. The ineffectualness of Western religion and the rising power of rabid fundamentalism, hungry for power, especially in America. The awareness that science and rationality has now replaced, it's undercut the roots of religion, and the whole rising culture wars which are tearing Western society apart. These are, I mean, I could have picked other things, but these are an example of issues in the landscape of the world we now live in. And if theology doesn't address these, and if these things don't end up being part of the reformation of theology, then I think that we'll miss the boat. As I see it, the central claims of Christianity can still hold and have much to offer in the world, but they need a fresh alchemy of the Spirit to reinterpret and reconfigure that message for this new situation that we find ourselves in as the 21st century rolls along. I mean, for instance, an omnipotent God outside, up there, elsewhere, somewhere in the sky, mediated through dogmatic religious traditions which claim that they and they alone provide access to that God, just no longer works, no longer rings true with most people. All these religious communities all sort of, jostling around saying, we've got it, we've got it, we've got it, we've got it, and this notion of the all-powerful God up there in the heavens and so on, it just doesn't really work anymore. I think that what we need is a much more immanential vision of God, by which I mean a vision of God present everywhere, but essentially here, within the very kind of fabric of creation, with present in the very depth of social, cultural and material things in the world, not far from any one of us, as Paul rather wonderfully put it in Acts 17 when he was speaking to the Athenians at Mars Hill. And he basically said, look, this is the God I'm declaring to you. And he didn't quote the Bible. No, he quoted from Greek poets, the poet who said, God is not far from any one of us. In God we live and move and have our being. He drew on the cultural kind of surroundings in order to bring God in a fresh way to people. And I think that that's what we need to do, to look into our world today and say, where are the rumours of glory here? Where are the reverberations of God in our culture? Because that's, where we will be able to most effectively connect with people. Another thing would be the whole business of interpreting the cross. We've been thinking about that a lot in these last few days, but interpreting the cross through models and metaphors which are basically drawn from feudal society. The image of an angry, offended God who, equates to the sort of wealthy landowner who's angry with somebody, requiring repayment. Violence and bloodshed and the death of an innocent victim is all that will satisfy the sense of justice of this God in order that he can forgive the human race. I mean, this just makes no sense at all in the world in which we live. And actually, I think it is more the product of a medieval feudal world than it is a product of biblical truth. We need instead, I think, in our world, a vision of a crucified God of love, unconditionally participating in the sufferings of the world and offering hope and solidarity, a God who is here with us, who is with the most deprived and the most suffering people of the world. We also need a notion of resurrection that isn't lost in all the old unprovable arguments about an empty tomb. It just leaves me empty, I have to say. But a living, present Jesus Christ calling us to follow him in practicing resurrection in a world of prejudice, hatred, injustice and conflict. I'm less interested, when I think about the Reformation, I'm less interested in what the reformers like Luther and Calvin had to say 500 years ago than I am in what they might wish to say in today's global ecological crisis, for example. That'd be a lot more interesting. They spoke into the world of their day. If they were here today, what would their message be? More importantly, actually, I'm deeply interested in what Jesus would say and do in a world of gross inequality and horrendous injustice. What would Jesus say or do about Gaza or Sudan or the Ukraine or wherever? What would Jesus say or do about migrants and refugees and prisoners, about humanitarian situations? These are the things that matter, you see, because the question really isn't, do we believe in the details of the Nicene Creed? But much more, what is our theology about climate change, about the Middle East, about poverty in Britain, about sexuality and gender, about social media? These are where the places where the conversation needs to be vigorously going on, not arguments about the 4th century or whatever. We need a new reformation, guys. That's what we need. Faith and theology for an unfolding 21st century. That's where that vigorous, unending discussion needs to be focusing right now. But all in all, I think that's probably about enough for us to digest for one Easter day. So, as I say, I'm going to take a break from the Holy Shed next week. I'm knackered, basically. I need a break. But I will be preaching at St. Leonard's next Sunday, so I'll put up a link about that if you're interested, if that helps to keep things going. And I'm also curating this Thursday a Soul Space. It's a Zoomed event, which you're very welcome to join, on the subject of home. It's a meditation for Earth Day. This Tuesday is Earth Day, and I think that's an important subject. Oh, and I'll be doing Pause for Thoughts on Radio 2's breakfast show for the next 3 Mondays, starting tomorrow. I'm on around 7:20 a.m., but you can catch up later on the BBC Sounds app if you wish. I'll post links about that anyway on Facebook. So there we are. If you like what I'm doing here in the Holy Shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee or two. You just need to follow the link which is on the screen. And we deeply appreciate all of those of you who support us in that way and other ways too. So that's about it, my lovelies. A couple of things though. Let me just give you my Easter prayer, which I think I've got here, yes, which I've already posted on Facebook. But this is my prayer for Easter Day.
If I knew I would die tomorrow, a prayer for Easter morning. If I knew I would die tomorrow, which may not be a bad thought to entertain, since it reminds us how precious life is and how spectacularly we take it for granted. I think I'd try to track down a ring ousel, because I've never seen one of them. I'd probably whiz up to Swaledale for another pint of Theakston's Old Peculiar, which I expect will be on draft in the hereafter, but who can tell? I would email lots of friends to say I love you, and tell them how they've helped to make my life the most spectacular ride imaginable. I would organise a massive, beautiful dinner party and cook a huge pan of Liverpudlian scouse with apple crumble and custard to follow. I would definitely lock eyes with my beloved and share with her the biggest belly laugh ever, in gratitude for the love and hilarity we have shared. I would fit in some time in my famous garden shed, which so magnificently helped me through the lockdowns and birthed the digital village, which I never expected and will never forget. I believe in Easter. I believe Easter is a great shout of joy waiting to be born each and every day, in mostly ordinary, unobtrusive, yet utterly awesome ways. I believe in fresh opportunities, new chapters, and unexpected outcomes. I believe that however dark the winter, spring will always spring again, heralded by a dazzling choir of birdsong. Don't, for God's sake, let it go unnoticed. I believe Easter announces that life will never finally end.
Amen to that. So let's drink to it, shall we? If you've got a drink handy, I've got some of Lambeth's Best here, but if you've got a drink handy, I'd like you to join me in a toast to Easter, a toast to Jesus, who stood up to the authorities of his day in solidarity with ordinary people against the repressive, violent empire and cruel, hypocritical religious leaders. A toast to the one who was murdered and yet is risen to new life in the hearts of all who follow his way. A toast to living resurrection today, tomorrow, and every day. To life conquering death. To life, L'chaim. So there we are. Don't forget, no shed next week, but I will be back the week after. So I'm going to finish with a Butte song by Carrie Newcomer called Lean In Toward the Light, which actually contains the phrase practice revolution. She's a gem. So meanwhile, have a great couple of weeks. Keep your head high. Be kind to yourself and others. Stay human. I'll see you soon. Here's Carrie.
Winter is the oldest season, but quietly beneath the snow, seeds are stretching out and reaching, faithful as the morning glow. Carry nothing but what you must.
Lean in toward the light.
Let it go, shake off the dust.
Lean in toward the light.
Today is now, tomorrow beckons.
Lean in toward the light.
Keep practicing resurrection.
Lean in toward the light.
Shadows of this world will say there's no hope, why try anyway? Every kindness, large or slight, shifts the balance toward the light. Waters wide and open wide.
Lean in toward the light.
And don't just walk when you can fly.
Lean in toward the light.
Justice seems in short supply.
Lean in toward the light.
Let beauty be our truest guide.
Lean in toward the light.
The shadows of this world will say there's no hope, why try anyway? Every kindness, large or slight, shifts the balance toward the light. The prayer I pray at eventide,
Lean in toward the light.
all left undone be put aside.
Lean in toward the light.
When forgiveness is hard to find,